Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files. And this, of course, is No
No
Darkness
darkness,
But
just
Ours.
us. So we're
Last
continuing
time
on.
we were talking a fair amount about experimental film within the context of found footage storytelling. Yeah, it's found footage narrative, just trying to take found footage stuff and stick it on the page as opposed to up on the screen. And this week we're going to be talking more about that, but less about my stuff and more about Simon's stuff and indeed
I,
other people's stuff generally.
yeah, much more about other people's stuff because I haven't done anything anywhere near as much in that vein as you have. So we were kind of partway through a discussion where Jem is telling us about what she loves so much about this kind of fiction and what she thinks it should be doing.
Absolutely.
So we'll go back to the conversation that we were having.
Let the audience, the readers, put some of the pieces together themselves. I hate found footage movies where the main characters are completely stupid.
Yeah.
And and stuff is happening right in front of them and they can't possibly figure it out. But the fact is that you, as a member of the audience, are a little further back and
Yes.
you can see everything as opposed to just seeing what they're seeing.
Yeah.
And that is the thing for me, which makes found footage narrative so interesting.
Yeah.
You have the benefit of the frame and they don't.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's anyway. I mean, another kind of collage story. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu, and he talks
Yes.
about how you have all these unrelated pieces of information,
Yeah.
but it's not until you fit them all together that this kind of brief glimpse of the true nature of reality kind of flashes out from it. That's the phrase he uses, and it just gives you that glimpse of the true horror of existence,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
absolutely. And again, it's like these supposedly unrelated
Yeah,
narratives, right? These supposedly unrelated pieces of information. But one of the things that I used to tell my students when I was teaching just sort of normal storytelling, I guess. When I was teaching them how to write, how to come up with a story, because there are a lot of people who end up, working in the film industry. They're not writers necessarily,
yeah,
but they need to be able um, to recognize why a story works or why a story doesn't work.
exactly.
Because otherwise they're going to find themselves, working on a shit script for 3 years, you know, and and going like, man, that was a bad idea. Why did we do that? It's like we learned stuff, but anyway. But one of the things that I used to say was that you think that you don't know how to tell a story, but the fact is you do know how to tell a story. Everyone knows how to tell a story. You take a bunch of seemingly unrelated things and you stick them together to make a story out of them. We are pattern making species,
Yeah, but it's
so
simplest level. You
I,
take
I can
pieces of
throw
information,
things at
break.
you. Yeah, I can throw things at you and they seem like they're not related, like, apple, tree, man, bump, head, and somewhere in your brain there is a mechanism that goes, a man sat under a tree, an apple fell on his head, and a bump resulted.
Yeah,
Right? Because we all know that we are prisoners of time. That things have a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know, and that everything has to be kind of, okay, life is like a giant, magnificent river, but really it all goes through the same dam,
yeah,
it all goes through the same sluice.
yeah,
So,
yeah, very much so.
yeah. So, so we have, as readers and as audience members, we have the we are in the enviable position of being able to see how things fit together. And so, yeah, let the audience figure out how things fit together. You know, you don't have to tell them about it. They
Well,
can
yeah,
do it on their own, you know.
and in many
And the
ways
ones who
that's
can't, fuck them.
yeah. I mean, in many ways, if you don't let the audience kind of make those connections, then if you again, if the whole point of found footage or the found narrative or the collage narrative is to kind of create this kind of verisimilitude and make it more convincing, then it really gets buggered if you have characters saying things that just feel like, okay, it's exposition infodump time here.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, no, because that's not what actual people do.
No,
And,
actual people downplay things that they find weird. Actual people think they struggle to try and they rationalize. They struggle to try and figure out a rational explanation for irrational things. At the most, moving a little further out, they might go, okay, there might be a mythological explanation for this. I never believed in God or the devil, but you know, if there was a time that I might believe in God or the devil, maybe this would be it. Or, you know, a little further, and these days, you know, it might be, well, maybe Q was right with all that QAnon shit. You know, it's like maybe, or okay, maybe UFOs do exist.
well,
You know, it's like, suddenly it becomes like, as we said, that the folk wisdom of the or the supernatural ideas of today are far more likely to be conspiracy theories, you know. Or maybe we are living in the Matrix.
Yeah, the trouble is so many of the conspiracy theories are completely, are always like blaming sort of hidden reptile overlords or Jewish conspiracies or stuff like that. It's kind of like
or then they try to explain things metaphorically, and you know, people get interestingly knotted up when people in movies start talking about movies, or you know, people in TV shows start talking about TV shows. But why would they not? I mean, don't they live in the same universe that we inhabit? Don't they live in the same culture that we live in? You know?
I mean, it can be complicated. I mean, I remember when I wrote my first novel, Tide of Souls, is basically a zombie novel, and I wanted the zombies to be scary. And it's kind of like the last thing I can have is I've got to avoid at all costs that kind of jokey self-referentiality where you're having little nods to Night of the Living Dead and blah blah blah. So effectively, it was just effectively I had to kind of effectively imagine a world where George Romero would never made the Night of the Living Dead and all this shit was new.
Well, yeah, you know, the same thing that they say about The Walking Dead, right? You know, it's like, why don't you call them zombies? They're obviously zombies. You know, it's like, well, obviously that didn't happen in this universe, as opposed to World War Z. You know, again, an amazing found footage, you know, book built around the same model as Studs Terkel's, you know, The Good War. You know, where you interview a whole bunch of people who were involved in a historical moment, and then you put it in order to tell the story of that historical moment. And you know, nobody in that is fucking around. I mean, it's like there's a guy in that who's pretty obviously Steven Spielberg, you know, who at one point is talking about somebody who at one point is talking about Martin Scorsese having made a documentary about the Battle of New York while he was in New York while the battle was happening, you know, and nobody's fucking around. It's like, yeah, George Romero existed. These things are zombies, in that they are dead bodies coming back to life. There you go.
Yeah, that's another way of doing it.
That's definitely another way of doing it, because, you know, whenever people are sort of like, oh, it adds some funniness to it. You know, there's nothing really funny about. There are moments of really black humor in World War Z, but yeah. we could go straight from this into talking about really good examples of found footage stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In literature,
Yeah.
I've got to admit, there's a lot of stuff. I felt woefully unprepared for this end of things, because it's kind of like I was thinking there must be more books that I can immediately think of. I mean, of course, House of Leaves, I think, is possibly
Yeah.
an interesting one to discuss, but I've never read it. I feel like I should probably have my horror writer card taken off me for that admission. But
It's it's okay. House of Leaves is quite an amazing achievement, but I gotta say that, you know, of the two, it's basically a pair of nesting narratives, and of the two, there's one that I like a lot better than the other. So, you know, I really feel like I've only read half of it in a lot of ways. But you know, I really, looking back, there are so many books that had a big effect on me that are essentially found footage narratives. You know, one of the earliest ones that I can think of, aside from Dracula, is a book by Esther Forbes, ostensibly a YA book, called A Mirror for Witches, which takes the form, beautifully so, of an absolutely accurate pamphlet about the life of a woman named Doll Bilby, who is eventually convicted of being a witch. And you know, it's the kind of pamphlet that you would have gotten around the time of the Salem witch trials. You know, it's like, oh, and you know, an account of the terrible things that happened in Salem Village, la la la. You know, or what is it? The Wonders of the Invisible World, by Cotton Mather.
Yeah, Cotton Mather.
Yeah. And you know, so the language is perfect, but as you read the book, you begin to realize that this is not the story of a woman who was a witch. This is the story of a woman who an entire village kind of worked on since she was, you know, a little kid adopted by a Puritan family, to make her believe that inevitably she would become a witch. And wow. Yeah, and the psychological ruin of a person, of a human being.
Jesus.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so worth your time. It's one of those books where I'm like, I can't believe that this book is not better known than it is. But yeah, I ran across that when I was about 13 or something, in a school library, promptly stole it. never brought it back. It's like, I brought it back. And I think I actually still have the copy that I had back then. But you know, so there's something like that, or there's something like Tim Lucas's Throat Sprockets. You know, which and this definitely and Throat Sprockets definitely is. I think I don't think the main character ever names himself or is named, but he definitely is Tim Lucas, because he, you know, he's the kind of guy who would have, with the same obsessions and the same understanding of genre filmmaking, who would have, you know, ended up founding a magazine like Video Watchdog. And he is talking about and describing like a series of movies that he ends up seeing by a guy who nobody knows very much about. They seem to be giallo type, you know, thrillers, but more and more as he watches them, he realizes that these are movies that were made by a person with a throat fetish, a person who Yeah, who is trying to get across the beauty of the throat and the permeability of the throat, and it's sort of like he's made a movie that has a virus stuck inside of it, but the virus is causing people who watch the movie and respond to it to become throat fetishists and vampires. But not like supernatural vampires, but just, people who really like to drink blood from each other's throats.
Yeah, biting the I mean,
Yep.
more recently with the Sarah Lotz's The Three, which I know we're both great admirers of. Indeed, of pretty much everything.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, The Three is a particularly beautifully done kind of collaged narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, The Three is fascinating. It tells a story in pieces from a couple of different perspectives, and it's so overwhelming in some ways that every part of it is a surprise, and a really wonderful surprise. What I do find interesting is how her later book, Day 4, is kind of like a sidequel in some strange way to The Three, and her book, The White Road, contains elements literally of found footage.
Yes, yeah. I was trying to remember how found footage that was, how much of a collage narrative that was. But I mean, there are literal elements of found footages, including that ending,
Yes.
which is just incredibly black and grim.
Yeah. Black, bleak, grim. It's, if it begins with, let's take John Krakauer's Into Thin Air and make it super, 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 super creepy in a supernatural way, but then adds unreliable narrators and nested narratives and lying and misrepresenting yourself to people. It's amazing. It's really, really good. And all of these books have the added thing for me at least, that they translate incredibly well to audiobooks, because of their and there's a guy named Matt Wesolowski, stuff.
Can't believe we didn't
all of
give him
whose
all
stuff.
6 stories. Series novels.
Yeah, and they're all formatted as a podcast, as like a 6-episode. The podcast has 6-episode seasons. Each episode tells about an event from, like a cold case event, from a different perspective, and is built around usually one different interview per episode, and and again translates perfectly and beautifully to the medium of like an audible audiobook. I've listened to all of them like that.
And Veselowski is very good at it. He can turn that kind of borderland between crime stroke thriller and the supernatural. There's the way, I mean the way he writes. I mean, the titles all are almost invariant. I mean, apart from the first 6 stories, the Hydra, Beast, Demon, Deity, Changeling, all with a supernatural implication to them, and all capable of some form of supernatural, quasi supernatural interpretation. Which basically is a very good way of this is a thriller, but anyone looking for horror fiction can also read this and not feel at all shortchanged.
Two more that I ran across on Audible first before reading them in physical form. Gina Wool's book, Security, which is somewhat like a giallo, told through, security logs and footage from security cameras inside of an office building. Yeah. And the other one, Fantastic Land by Mike Bachoven. And Fantastic Land, much like World War Z, is a Studs Terkel-esque, good war kind of book, which tells what happens after a not quite Disneyland type place is cut off and partially flooded, cut off from civilization and partially flooded during a hurricane, and the skeleton crew of people left behind are all not like late teenagers, early 20s people who've agreed to make sure that nobody like breaks in and destroys the rides while they're waiting to be rescued. And they end up making themselves into tribes and starting to kill each other.
Oh, as you do. As you do.
Yes.
Oh,
and
I just thought of a wonderful piece of short fiction, which is a wonderful, very original form of found narrative, and that is The Last Sailing of the Henry Charles Morgan in 6 Pieces of Scrimshaw, 1841, by A.C. Wise. That's published in the Dark magazine, and it's just, it's one of those things where I absolutely love the story and all of the story. I slightly hate the author for having come up with this idea before I could have. But I'm at the same time, I think, yeah, right, you'd have come up with this idea. It's like so many ideas, like so many of the best ideas. It's such a beautifully, elegantly simple idea. You're thinking, why the fuck did I not think of that?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's magnificent. I think it's an
I absolutely know what you're talking about, and I absolutely agree. I mean, there's so many good pieces of found footage narrative in the short form that out there right now, and often these are things that end up getting picked up by places like Pseudopod or the Dark Podcast or place or Nightmare. Nightmare has its own podcast as well. Whatever the things that it's interesting that things like that often have a little more activity as a monologue than other things do.
Yeah. Just have another good fact. Very much done as literal found footage, and it's going back a good few years now. It's Man in Danger, a video self-portrait by Simon Clark. I don't know how to find this one. It was in the Silver Salamander Press collection, Salt Snake. But I mean, it's one of them. Simon, a lot of his short fiction is just great at presenting these narratives that are just slices of here is a very vividly drawn portrait of real life. Now something absolutely batshit strange is going to happen, but no explanation. It's the case of dealing with it. And yeah, Man in Danger is a kind of it's basically I think it's a handful of sort of bits of it from this guy's video diary as he's quit his job, sold his house, and retreated to a cottage on the moors to try and write his great novel. And everything's going wrong, and this strange stuff is starting to happen. And I think it's a marvelous story. It has this hole in the wall, which is supposed to be an ordinary wall no more than a foot thick, and yet you can put your arm all the way into this hole, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And the video footage, and then although he lives alone in the house, the video footage is showing him someone's filming him huddled in bed, crying and scared. But eventually he writes this novel called Quid Pro Quo about this fellow who lives in a house, and there's this demonic presence that kind of torments him, but also basically gives him what he needs to write the stuff that will make him famous. And he sort of says well, there we go. And besides, if I can't take it anymore, I know what to do. And he puts his gun to his head and just goes,
Yes, exactly. There's, that's another thing that really strikes me about why, for example, the creepypasta has become more and more popular as like a cultural idea. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we are being lied to a lot of the time. Things are being shown from very specific angles, and we know it.
yeah,
We're, things are advertising things to us. Things are trying to persuade us of things, and we're being asked to question the narratives that are presented to us on a daily basis. And, so that idea, that very simple idea of, this is a story that I'm going to tell you about something that really happened, in and then in brackets next to it, or did it?
yeah.
Yeah. That very, very simple baseline idea that is the beginning of all fiction, not just genre fiction and not just horror fiction, has kind of extended to everything in the world, to every narrative. It's like, yeah, you're telling me this, but there must be more to this, right?
Yes.
And really we're approaching a kind of tipping point where we have to stop ourselves from doing that, where we have to go like, no, maybe this actually just is what's going on.
Yeah. This is it's a little bit, because obviously it's one thing to have a healthy distrust of mainstream narratives or whatever, but at the same time, it's a bit like that quote of Emile Camer, I think his name is. They said, when men choose not to believe in God, they don't then have to believe in nothing. They'll then believe in anything. And the problem is, of course, when people, like you say, we know that we're being lied to a lot. We know that we're being presented facts from things from one particular angle, and that facts that don't fit a particular narrative get excluded. The problem is, of course, that then it becomes basically then to dismiss anything you don't want to believe in, and accept anything you do want to believe in, no matter how at variance with the reality it is.
Yeah, that's right. So you have to hit that nice kind of niche, that kind of socket between I know that this probably isn't real, but I believe you. I'm choosing to believe you. And no, you've gone too far. It's like, no, I don't choose to believe you anymore. I always remember, there were two benchmark things that I've seen in terms of people reacting to things. I have two friends who are identical twins from Newfoundland, who grew up with terrible stutters, and they both got speech therapy from a guy from New York. So they ended up both kind of talking like this, and even though they're from Newfoundland. And one of them is an engineer, and the other one is a physicist. And I had the wonderful experience of watching Armageddon by Michael Bay with those two dudes. And I was sitting behind them, and every once in a while, one of them would like lean to the other and go, yeah, like that could ever happen. Yeah, I know. Slingshot around the sun. You'd have to build up so much energy. I know, it's ridiculous. It's like kind of like the best and the worst experience at the same time.
The worst being watching a Michael Bay film, presumably.
Yeah, it's true. It's not my favorite. Let's put it that way. I have my favorite terrible action films from that era, but I'm far more a Con Air person, Con Air by Simon West person, than I am an Armageddon by Michael Bay person. Anyway, so the other one was when I had been reading Bag of Bones by Stephen King, and I quite liked it, and I recommended it to my mom, and she's like, yeah, I usually have problems with Stephen King. And I'm like, well, it's a really good book. So if you want to borrow it, feel free. She's like, mm-hmm. So about a week later, she calls me up and she says, I was really enjoying it. I was about 6 chapters in and I was really enjoying it. With the guy, the writer whose wife died, and he's so grief stricken, and he goes to that little cottage, and then he gets interested in that woman who's living near him and her son, and then he realizes that this rich guy who's also moved into the neighborhood is her ex-husband, and they've got this terrible divorce going on, and just trying to deal with to protect this woman from her terrible ex-husband, and da 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 da. I'm like, yep, no, yep, that was good. So what happened? I said, and she goes, but then he started all that ghost shit. Started just bringing in all that horror ghost shit, and I couldn't do it anymore. It's like, what did you think was going to happen, Mom?
I remember the Guardian review when The Haunting of Bly Manor came out on Netflix, and a review in the Guardian said, I can never get into ghost stories because it's silly, because there's no such, because ghosts aren't real. It's like, I've got really bad news for you about every work of fiction you've ever read. The clue is in the word fiction. And, none of those characters are real. Nothing you've read, none of these things are real.
None of those things are real. It's like, yes, it begins with the grit. From the grit, you build the pearl. The grit is real. The pearl is not real. In fact, half of the grit isn't real. So tell me where Black Mountain comes from.
Well, to be honest, it came from the title initially. I was listening to I got a CD of sort of alt country, which is not. I mean, the old joke is old country is when your wife comes back, your truck starts working again, your dog gets resurrected.
That's right.
It was a compilation album of various country songs that were very much not. I think because there's that stereotypical idea of country and western being kind of very yeehaw, very reactionary sort of. But instead, it was all sorts of. I mean, it's everything from Johnny Cash to more recent bands like Grand Rabbit and Sparkle Horse. But there was also the song Black Mountain by Isabel Campbell and the late great Mark Lanigan.
Oh wow!
Which I just thought was a beautiful song, but I just loved the title. And I don't know if this happens to you. It happens to me sometimes. You'll get a title, and a title comes to you, and you think, oh, yeah, I like that, and I could write. I feel, and you just feel like you could write something really good with that title. The only problem then is finding a story to go with it. And I batted a few ideas around, but none of them felt enough, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like I just felt this title needs to. I love this title. There's an energy to it. It needs to be the title of something really honking big, and it's not enough to be a story about a haunted this or a whatever. And I waffled ideas around. I couldn't decide what to do, and I watched a sort of partially completed documentary about the so-called Bennington Triangle in Vermont, and it's and what I liked about this one was it was because it was a part finished documentary, and it talks about various there have been various disappearances in this very heavily wooded area, including Paula Jean Weldon, whose case actually formed the inspiration for Shirley Jackson's novel Hangsaman. Yeah. There are a bunch of other a lot of these individually, most of these disappearances could be explained pretty rationally, because it's a number of people over a period of time, and you've got this big area of kind of wild woodland. There's a lot of old habitations in there, so there's old wells and stuff like that. If you're very the unwary, you could easily fall down, and of course would be lost to sight. but you sort of, people seem to keep disappearing, and some of the circumstances are a bit weird here or there. But and then there was a bit of this and a bit, and I thought there's nothing. What I liked about it was there was nothing that really formed a clear, obvious pattern of, there's a vampire in the woods or a werewolf on the hill or anything like that. It's just, this is a place where weird shit happens.
Yes.
Where bad things happen.
It's a thin place.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of came to me that this was how it could be almost like a series of different, like a series of, it's like the Black Mountain Files almost. There's a series of reports of different weird things, each kind of like, I think, just like each are kind of like one weird little narrative in itself, one creepy little narrative in itself, and then you put them all together and it builds up this picture of, I do not know what the fuck's going on, but I'm not going there on holiday. To put it very mildly. And I kind of like that kind of open-ended feel, that sort of, it doesn't have to have an easy kind of explanation. And that's just kind of noodled ideas around for this. And the idea of, I really wanted to get that kind of verisimilitude of it, that kind of idea that would something that really make people think, is this something that could actually be happening or could have happened? And of course, the problem that immediately came to, well, the problem is, if you're going to do this as a novel, then it immediately goes out, it's a work of fiction by Simon Bestwick. And I kind of try to figure, how could I narrate this? And it's like, well, because whoever your narrator is, it's a fictional character that you've made up. And I came up with the idea of using Rob Markland, because way back in the 90s, myself and another writer, a guy called Richard Bennett, we wrote a handful of stories together in collaboration and used the byline Rob Markland. So if anyone did a little bit of Googling, they would find stories by Rob Markland published in small press magazines in the 1990s. So this person could actually appear to have existed. So I could have him tell the story, but even then, it would still be a fictional creation. And that was kind of when the idea was, what about giving it that extra twist?
And what I love about that is that you have the double frame, right? So it's it becomes the box of files in a almost callback to the Call of Cthulhu. It's like, why are you collecting all this stuff? Why are you putting all this stuff together? You use Markland as the person who becomes interested and then obsessed and then gets subsumed into the movement of what he is investigating. And actually it's a three layer thing, right? Because Markland is investigating that earlier writer who got subsumed into it.
Russell Ware,
and then Markland becomes subsumed into it, and then you get you on the outside, which I love. And it's like, it's beautiful. It's sort of like, so am I gonna get subsumed into it?
Yeah, that's the thing. I
really
wanted to kind of twist it around and open it out so that there would be that, because ultimately it's like the audience. Otherwise, because the audience could just go, well, poor bastard, but ultimately, I'm not going to get involved with any of that shit. I'm not going to do anything like that, so I'm fine. And so the idea, actually, about that, bad news, because you've actually read this thing.
That's right. So you're fucked.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, part of I face that at the dealing with experimental film. It's like, how do you end that when essentially it's like. You always, there's that problem of, do you live, do you die? What is, can you have an actual end to something that is taking place on a level that, to some degree is not reachable for you as a human character? I love the fact that, it's that perversity again. I love the fact that, you know, the only thing that's left to Lois in the same way that it was left to, you know, Mrs. A. McCullough Wickham earlier, is to accept or reject the offer, to accept or reject Lady Midday. And that, you know, that Lois has possibly not the strength, but at least the perversity to go, no. It's like, forget it. So, no, I'm not into that. You can cut my head off if you want. Why? Because fuck you. That's why.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, the novel I'm writing at the moment, I think the main character in that, I think she's definitely got some of I think she could definitely almost be a Gemma Files character sometimes, because she has got that quality, or at least there are situations where she could actually potentially, there was at least an offer on the table by which she can extricate herself from her predicament. How much in good faith that offer is made is, you know, obviously is a matter of debate, but she is still, no, fuck you, because I don't want to do that, and you're not going to make me, and you can kiss my shiny red arse, basically. It's been a very fun character to write, because in that sense, because I do tend to be one of these people who I have to kind of like fight in many ways the habit of you know, trying to be a bit too accommodating or a bit too reasonable. It's kind of like, no, you've actually got to put your foot down sometimes for what you want, what's important to you. And sometimes just having a very stubborn attitude of, because fuck you, that's why, is as you say,
when you're dealing with gods, that's all you can do, really. You know?
I don't know if you ever read the playwright Howard Barker, although I came across his work, but a lot of his characters have that kind of perversity, or that strong sense of individuality. They, you know, this is who I am, this is what I want, and I'm not going to apologize for it, and I'm not going to bend to your will for, you know, whatever. There's a wonderful one where called Scenes from an Execution, and it's the execution of a painting, not a capital punishment thing, but the painter in it is being, you know, she's got some like dude questioning about this work of art she's produced, and it's like, no, please argue with us. He goes, no, because you'll only win the argument. Kind of her response. I mean, which is not in the sense that she knows she's in the wrong, but in the sense that you know, she knows that this guy is just going to run rings around her, tie her in knots, and, you know, beat her down with reams and reams of rational whatevers. And it's kind of like, you know what, fuck that. You know, here is where I stand, and basically,
here I stand, I can do no other.
Exactly. I mean, back with Black Mountain, that was originally done as a serial with a now defunct publisher. So the version of it is published now by Independent Legions is slightly different from what was originally printed. What was originally issued. The first installment of the serial was basically began with me hearing about Rob Markland is in a bit of a state, and he's been locked up actually, and he's asking for you, and then it's kind of finding out how Rob Markland got involved, and finding out about Russell Ware. Whereas I kind of rejiggled it for novel purpose, for the purposes of fusing it into a coherent novel at the behest of my agent. But I kind of, one of the things I really liked about it was, like I said, you can have all these different weird shit things happening. Any kind of all the kind of sort of mysteries of the unexplained kind of, you know, what was the mysterious beast? What happened to why have all these people disappeared? What happened in this place? What happened in that? You can have elements of true crime and all of that. I mean, there was a real life murder case that fed a bit into the installment called The House by the Cemetery. Just a couple of British expats who were trying to run a hotel in France, and it all went wrong, and the husband ended up being charged with the murder of the wife. It was one of these very kind of bleak, sort of sad depressing there, but for the grace of whatever go I kind of thing. And so that fed into one of the narratives. And what I really liked about it was, in theory, I could just keep, you could layer this as much as possible. You could have all these different, you could do as many different things as you wanted. And obviously, bit by bit, it kind of works out for itself how all the bits were going to fit together.
Yeah, and what I loved was how far back you were going. I mean, I found all of it absolutely delightful, but by the time you got back to the Romans, I was just like, yeah, baby, let's do it.
Well, I think you're gonna have something evil lurking in the forests of North Wales. You've got to kind of make it fucking primal. This shit's got to be going back a long way. And it was enormous fun because the kind of collage thing to be writing in all these different, trying out all these different narrative voices and all the different things. I mean, I had a lot of fun with the Roman one. The sort of the writing about this kind of obscure life of its life of an obscure Roman general by an obscure Roman, and then yes, there's another 4 fucking pages here about how fucking brilliant this general is. Yeah. Just be glad you didn't have to read this shit yourself.
Exactly. That's the pleasures of an antiquary, right? The pleasures of antiquarianism is that you can just go, and now let's skip forward a little.
Let's skip over the boring crap into something a bit more interesting.
Exactly.
So it was an enormously pleasurable thing to write, and very much. There were a couple of times I actually creeped myself out writing it at the same time, which I always regard as a very good sign.
Yeah, that's the best. That is literally the best. I did that with experimental film, so yeah. So that's it's the does it make your flesh creep? Does it make the hairs on your forearms rise? Yes. Oh, good.
I was glad to feel I felt I'd done the title justice by the time I finally finished the wretched thing. Because the nice thing about doing something which flicks lots of different points of view is you can get that thing, I think, with the long form work where you start to get thoroughly fed up with these bloody characters. It's like, Jesus Christ, it's like been stuck with these people for months.
Yeah, that's right. And with a collage novel, you don't have to feel that. It's like one of the fun parts about writing Mr. Whitcomb, where it was that an entire book by Mr. Whitcomb would have been dreadful to slog through because his main his main characteristic was how much he loved his wife, and how brilliant my wife is. Let me tell you more about how brilliant my wife is. She's amazing. I know you don't think that women can do anything, but she's so gloriously brilliant. It's one of the pleasures. Nope, I only had to see him for a chapter. Just write 2 sad letters, or really one sad letter, and chop it in half.
It's one of the great things, one of the great joys of this format for the writer is that you can have all the pleasure of both the of writing long form fiction and writing short form fiction.
Yes.
In that sense, you can just try out something, but only has to last. I mean, as you say, there are some ways of writing something where it would become quite a slog to try and sustain that for 300 pages or whatever. But for 10 or 20, it's quite doable and just fits into that bigger narrative. And
exactly. So all of y'all out there who want to write, you should write something found footage. Absolutely.
And all of you who like horror, if you haven't already read experimental film, and each thing I show you is a piece of my death, then where the hell have you been? Rectify that mistake immediately. So there.
Same thing with Black Mountain. But seriously, there are so many people doing amazing work in this field.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that gets me more excited when you think about it than, someone saying that simple thing. It's like, I opened this drawer and I found something I'd never found before, and it was a letter. It was, letter written in another time, or it was somebody's diary, or it was, a weird film reel. Jonathan Robb is another person who's super good at that. Camp Ghoul Mountain Part 5, I think, is this amazing book that he did fairly recently, where he's, it's like a novelization of a movie that doesn't exist, but also commentary on that novelization and on the book and on the movie itself and what was going on behind the scenes and in front of the scenes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's so good. So
Mountain Part 5. I love the title. Yeah. I love the title already.
Yeah.
Oh, Part 6 apparently. So I was just googling.
Yes, you're right.
I was just googling this title.
Camp Ghoul Mountain Part 6. But seriously, Rob does incredible work, and everything is worth your time.
I think that I've been getting quite a good. I mean, putting together like a reading and viewing list while we've been talking. Trying to sort of list the stuff that I haven't heard of. So on the list of movies to check out in this vein, there's The Cursed, the werewolf movie, and in terms of books,
we
have Throat Sprockets by Tim Lucas, Security by Gino Woolsdorf, I think it is, Woolsdorf.
Yep, that's right.
Is to be
I was calling her Gina Wool, and I apologize for that.
Fantastic Land by Mike Bockoven and Camp Ghoul Mountain Part 6 by Jonathan Robb, R-A-A-B.
Yeah, and all the Matt Wesolowskis.
Yes.
All the 6 stories novels.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are essential reading.
And of course, A Mirror for Witches by Esther Forbes.
Which there's one I'd missed. Yeah. And on the short fiction front, there's Man in Danger, a video self-portrait by Simon Clarke, and The Last Sailing of the Henry Charles Morgan in 6 pieces of Scrimshaw 1841 by A.C. Wise, which you can find over online at The Dark Magazine.
Yes. And the Pine Arch Collection by Michael Wehunt, which I believe is in Nightmare.
Apparently that's at The Dark Magazine as well.
Oh, hey, cool. Well, by the way, he has Michael Wehunt. If you Google his name, you can get to his personal website, and he has this incredible free story, which is written like a Time or New York Times long form article about a post-MAGA cult, which is like the equivalent of a howl for the Trump age.
Oh my God!
Seriously.
I'm seriously sold on that already. Is that The Teeth of America?
That's it. Teeth of America.
I've been Googling frantically as you were talking.
Yeah.
The Teeth of America by Michael Wehunt, which is over at his website, michaelwehunt.com.
Yes. Totally free. Go there and revel in it.
We've got nearly 2 hours of material.
Oh my
here.
God!
even allowing for some minor bits of snippage. I think this is going to be 2 podcasts basically.
I think you are correct.
Otherwise, people will just be falling asleep at the wheel of their car and driving off bridges or
hopefully not. Hopefully that's not going to happen.
God, Bestwick droning on again.
Damn it. So there you are. What did you think of the works we've been talking about, and what classics did we forget to mention? Let us know in the comments below.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit the like and share buttons, and you can find us on YouTube, Stitcher, Anchor, SoundCloud, and Spotify.
If you want to support the podcast, you can make a one-off donation over at our Ko-fi page or subscribe to our Patreon for access to exclusive content.
And to get the heads up on what's coming next, find us on Twitter or check out our website at nodarknessbutours.wixsite.com//podcast.
Okay.
So until the next time, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I am still Gemma Files, still and always.
And this continues to be No Darkness.
No darkness but ours. Yes.
And the fungus still loves the moisture.
Always, always.